Good morning, everyone. Time to begin our Sunday morning Bible study. We're so glad that you're here. This will be our last week in this third quarter. We have been studying Moses, I just went back and checked, since January 1st. We started January 1st in the book of Exodus with the story of the birth of Moses, and now we've made it through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and we're starting into Joshua today. So if you want to open up to the first chapter of Joshua, which should be opposite of the last chapter of Deuteronomy, which we'll be touching on as well. So as I said, it's our last lesson of the quarter. So the lesson today is entitled Journey's End. And as we mentioned last week, we are moving into the book of Joshua. And Brother Waldron's very specific in the way he separates these time periods in that they are still wandering in the wilderness up to Joshua chapter 5. And so we'll be getting into that today. But I wanted to close out last week's lesson. We didn't get a chance to talk about the death of Moses. Like I said, we've been studying Moses since January, and so it's perhaps a little emotional as you read those last couple chapters of Deuteronomy, and we've gotten to know him so well. What would you say was special about the death of Moses? Clarissa?
God buried him.
He was buried by God, right? No one knows where he is buried. Interesting choice by God, maybe I'm sure a good thing, because what might people have done? Yeah, perhaps some kind of a shrine, some sort of possible worship, right? And so God buries Moses. He's all by himself. What else did you see that's special about the death of Moses in Deuteronomy 34? Sam?
He had his vitality when he died.
Yeah. Yeah, he was how old? 120. That's pretty impressive, right? We know that today our lives are, as the Psalm says, 70 years, or by reason of strength, 80, right? If you're making it beyond that, you're blessed, right? And so he lives to 120 years, and it says, 34 and verse 7, his eye was not dim, nor his vigor abated. He climbs Mount Nebo on his last day, right? That's an impressive climb up in Pisgah. And so, yeah, he's strong. And that last moment, that last day of his life, what's he spend it doing? He's seeing the land of promise, right? He's up there. One of my favorite lines out of any of our hymns in Sweet Hour of Prayer, right, is when it talks about, now I'm gonna forget it. I view my home and take my flight, and from Mount Pisgah's lofty height, I view my home and take my flight, right? Such a beautiful image of the end of life. And that's exactly what Moses is doing. He views the promised land, and it says that he's able to see, all the way to the sea, right? All the way to the Great Sea, I suppose, on the other side of the Promised Land, north and south. We haven't talked or haven't put up a map here in a week or so, but there's some really beautiful maps in full color that we have from our access to Waldron's material, and we have black and white in this book. And what's neat about Waldron's material is he'll give you the detailed map, but he'll also give you a blank one. And that's a really good way to start committing some of these little facts to memory, is to try to place these places on the map. Because the geography of these events really brings them to life. These are real places, and these were real events that did happen. You can kind of see on this map, it's a little dim, but here it says Mount Nebo. Sorry, my next slide zooms in a little bit. Here's Mount Nebo. And so from this peak, Moses is able to view the promised land. This particular map gives the geography of Palestine, And so you can see these four regions where this, of course, is the coastal plain, so that's going to be almost sea level. And then the hill country is kind of the high point, and so Jerusalem's on a mountain, right? This is a more hilly or mountainous region. And then, of course, it's going to go down to a very low point in the Jordan Valley. You can see some of the elevations here. The Dead Sea, negative 1292. That's way below sea level. Even the Sea of Galilee, I didn't know that, way below sea level. So this is a very low valley. But then over here, this is called the Transjordan Plateau, and sometimes they talk about the tableland, and that's the idea of this. This is very high country on the right-hand side or the eastern side of the Jordan, and so you're already in a high area, but you go up on Mount Nebo and you're actually quite a bit higher, able to view the land. And we pulled in these pictures a few weeks back from one of the Farrell Jenkins trips over to the Holy Land, where people go up on Mount Nebo and take a look and get the same view that Moses was able to see. Where sorry, they're a little grainy, but looking to the south, right? This would be south, so they're looking here at the land of Judah, and you can see the northern part of the Dead Sea. And then if you're looking back to the north, sorry, I meant to delete that word Judah. This would be where northern Israel would be situated, Ephraim, that area. And you can vaguely make out a little bit of the Jordan River Valley and the plains of Moab, where the children of Israel are based. All right, so I didn't get an answer to all of these questions. How is Moses described here at the end of his story that makes him unique in the Bible? Lena?
In verse 10, it says that there was no prophet like Moses, whom God knew face to face.
Right. Who God knew face to face. Interesting that it says that no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, when our second memory verse prophesied what?
Prophet.
Yeah. God will raise up a prophet like Moses. And so this is Bible commentary that there were more prophets after Moses, but they weren't like Moses was. He knew God face to face, and it lists a few other things. What are the other things that stand out here at the end of the book of Deuteronomy that Moses did in summary?
God's actions to the people outside of Israel, they were done through Moses. So Moses was like the tool that God used to do all these things.
Exactly. It says that all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh, and a second thing, he says, verse 12, the mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. So you think of those two categories, the things that he did in Egypt, boy, that would have been enough. Quite a resume with those 10 plagues. But then think of those 40 years in the wilderness with the water from the rock and the fiery serpents and all these different miracles that are happening because, and of course the pillar of cloud and speaking to God face to face on Sinai. These are the things that people saw Moses do in the presence of all Israel. He is quite an elevated figure, right, because of all that he has done. And also, when you think about miracles, sometimes we talk to people about whether or not miracles are happening today. As you look through Bible history, does this kind of stuff happen all the time? This is a very highly, a period of high miraculous activity. And you're not going to see that much past the conquest of Canaan. You're not going to see just miracles all the time until maybe the days of Elijah. There's a kind of an increase where there's quite a few miracles during those times. And then not until the days of Christ. And so you see these brief periods where God chooses to send miracles to confirm the words that he's speaking, right? That's the point of the miracles. He's giving a law, and he wants men to know these words are from me, so he sends the miracles. So Moses is certainly unique in the Bible. It says he knew God face to face. Any other comments on how you would describe his legacy? I've asked that question with Miriam and Aaron, now Moses.
I don't want to get too off topic, but just thinking of the comparisons of him to Christ, I like the point you just made.
Yeah, question 10.
Sorry. I just think of the fact that it says, God knew him face to face, but we see, later in the Gospels that Jesus says, if you've seen my face, you've seen that of the Father. So I think you have that anti-type relationship that can be made there as well.
Yeah.
Just a little bit greater.
And for sake of time, we should jump to question 10. What else did you guys put down for the most meaningful comparisons to you? It's a highly subjective question. No wrong answers. Francis?
He was more like Christ as a mediator between the people. When God was going to do something, he kind of said, no, why? He kind of petitioned for the people, for their existence.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think you kind of captured two of my favorite things. He was both a mediator, a go-between, because remember, I'd missed this detail, but I went back to the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, and it says God spoke those things to the people. That was they got to hear those 10 Commandments from the smoldering mountain as they stood at the base of the mountain from God. And as soon as they hear that 10th commandment, they go to Moses and say, please, will you just go get the information from God and tell us? We don't want to hear this anymore. This is terrifying. And so Moses becomes that go-between in that he's going to go hear from God, and then they're going to hear from him. Similar to Jesus, isn't it? He's a man that is very, you might say, approachable. People came, they loved Jesus, and they weren't afraid to come near and hear his word. When he's revealed in all of his glory, we will all fear him. But he was an approachable man, just like Moses was. But the other thing you mentioned was this intercession. To me, that's a huge connection to Christ, where Moses literally said, don't punish them for their sins, forgive them, blot me out. Right? That's a pretty significant comparison. Very few men make that humble request of God, spare these sinful people and destroy me. What else did you get? Anything else? There's so many, there's lists of like 40 or 50 comparisons.
The dichotomy of Moses being, the most humble man on earth, but also being, verses 11 and 12, he's the tool, all these signs and wonders and this great terror. Like in the same way, Christ is, literally God, but at the same time, he doesn't do anything that wasn't commanded to him by the Father, and in that way, he shows total submission and humility. I think that works together.
Yeah, Jesus said, I am meek and lowly of heart, right? So he was humble as Moses was. There's a comparison there. Yep. All right, moving on. So let's look into the book of Joshua. As you might expect, Joshua begins right where Deuteronomy leaves off. And it says, the very first words of Joshua chapter 1 are, now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. And then we're pretty familiar, I think, with verses 1 through 9. It's quite a speech where Joshua is encouraged to be strong and courageous. We have a great song from this chapter, be strong and courageous. So why might Joshua need encouragement to be strong and courageous? Bill.
Sorry.
Well, one, he was following Moses, which had to be difficult, and they had a great task ahead of them. it was important that they be courageous and depend on God because they had a lot to do to conquer the land ahead.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a tough act to follow. That's a great point. And Moses has been a great leader. Shirley, what else would you add? Nothing to add? So, yeah, he's got a task to now lead this people. Norm?
There's a couple of things that I think are often forgotten. It's weird that this would be done so often for Joshua. That he would continually be told over and over, especially in this first chapter, be strong and courageous. And like Joshua was their military commander. Has been since they left Egypt. Why would he need to be told to be strong and courageous? He is one of 2 men who came out of Egypt. Everyone he knew coming out of that country, out of that slavery, died in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And now it's his job to pick up after Moses, someone who he had been following closely this entire time, and lead this people, most of whom are far younger than him, and take them, these people that he has not fought beside, into this land and conquer it. And we got the reassurance of, I think we often forget or often don't realize how much we depend upon our peers. People who are the same age as us, who have experienced the same age, things that we have in life, and being able to rest and lean upon one another in that manner in order to keep going with our day-to-day lives. And then imagine being bereft of all of that. And he's not like 100 years old yet.
Mm-hmm. Is he a young man?
Yeah, he's not a young man. He and Caleb are officially the oldest men in the country, in Israel, right? Because everyone else has fallen in the wilderness. They're the only 2 who have survived. Because they were faithful, right? God's word has been true. They took the census, and everyone had died who was supposed to die, who had been unfaithful the first time they tried to go in. So he was already somewhat of Moses' assistant and somewhat of a military leader. Way back, Brother Waldron pointed out, way back at Rephidim, which was before they got to Sinai. And so he's already a mature leader by the time they leave Egypt, and now 40 more years, so he's in his 80s or beyond, you might say. So he's not a young man, but he is told to be strong and courageous. Think about that for us. You know, have you ever experienced that where a strong leader dies and there's, maybe you're impacted by that? What are some of the challenges that may arise when somebody who has been a great leader is suddenly gone? Lena?
I'm bringing from my personal life a current time, but Alexander the Great was a wonderful leader. He went through so many countries and conquered and brought the Greek language to so many cultures that united them, but at the same time, when he died, all of the empire fell apart because there was nobody to hold it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were not as strong as he was. He divides it among his 4 generals, and none of them are as strong as he was. Prophesied by Daniel, by the way, that was going to happen, and it happened just like that. Amazing proof of God's word. But yeah, when a strong leader's gone, there's a vacuum, and sometimes there's division. What about in a family? Same thing. I can speak from experience. When my grandfather passed away on my mom's side, it left a bit of a void in the family for spiritual leadership. And it seems that many were staying faithful to the Lord because they didn't want to disappoint Granddad. And now that Granddad's gone, they're drifting away. We see that in the Scriptures, the story of King Joash, who was faithful all the days of Jehoiada, the priest. But when Jehoiada, the priest, dies, Joash starts engaging in idol worship. And so this can happen. So Joshua needs to be strong and courageous. Otherwise, they're not going to be successful in their campaign. Moses has been a stalwart, faithful, immovable leader. And now he needs to be strong and courageous. I don't think we need to infer that he was shaking in his boots just because God tells him this, but he's encouraging him to go forward, right? And so what does Joshua do the very next day? Or maybe the same day.
Prepare for the conquest
Yeah,
verse 10. So we're in Joshua chapter 1, verse 10. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp, and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are to cross this Jordan, to go in, to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess it. So he's ready to go. That's what God tells him to do. He's given these specific commands. Cross the Jordan. So they're, as we noticed on the map, they're on the east side. They're going to have to cross the Jordan. That's a physical barrier for a million-man group, right? It's going to be challenging to enter the land if it wasn't for the miracle that we see depicted here on the screen that's about to happen. But yes, they're supposed to cross the land. So what orders did Joshua give to the people, and what was their response? Lena?
So he tells them to make provisions for 3 days. Apparently not expecting that they'll just come and have a restaurant there feeding them all. He also reminds the tribes that wanted to stay on the other bank that they still need to be ready to go and help with the conquest. And people respond so far that they'll listen to him just like they were listening to Moses.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong response, right? Verse 16, all that you have commanded us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. And notice what the people say to Joshua in verse 18, very end of the chapter. Only be strong and courageous. They say that back to Joshua. What does that tell you that people actually want? What kind of leadership? Norm?
Well, leadership that participates, leaders that lead,
Leaders that
can't lead from the back.
Yeah,
We're going to see that again when we get to the Judges with Deborah and Barak, where Barak wasn't wanting to lead. And when Deborah spurned him to go, he finally went. And then she sings the song, "Oh, when the leaders lead in Israel." How wonderful it is when the leaders lead. And so if we find ourselves in a leadership position, sometimes we may feel a little hesitant, a little cautious, a little afraid to be too assertive. But if it's the right thing to do, do it. And the people want you to do it. People need to be led. And here, where Joshua is God's appointed leader, do it. Do it faithfully. Do it with strength and with courage. And the people will rally to your side. All right, any other thoughts from question number 2 or chapter 1? I shouldn't overlook God's expectation of Joshua. Look back to verse 7. Joshua 1, verse 7. God says to Joshua, "Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth." And he goes on. So Joshua's success is conditional. If you obey the things that I've commanded Moses, who commanded them to you, I'll give you success. This is a passage that I think about a lot of times when we're at some of those difficult crossroads in life. Sometimes people are looking for a sign. Should I go here? Should I go there? God, give me a sign. Should I choose this college or that college? Give me a sign. Well, God doesn't work that way these days, right? He's not sending miraculous signs to some people and not to others. But what does he say? If you obey him, where will he be? He'll be with you wherever you go. If you serve the Lord faithfully, God will be with you wherever you go. And so if you choose to go to the left, serve God. Choose to go to the right, serve God, and he'll be with you there. That's what God expects from us, is to be faithful. All right, so then we have the story of Rahab in chapter 2. So Joshua sends in spies into the land. Sound familiar? Happened 40 years ago. He was one of the spies, one of the 12, right? And he was one of the two who were faithful of those spies, giving a good report. This time he sends 2 spies. They ford the Jordan, and they go. He wants them to go especially to Jericho, which is going to be their first point of conflict when they enter the land. And so they go into the city, and they meet a harlot named Rahab. So what did Rahab do that was by faith? Shirley?
Hid the spies.
She hid the spies. That's right. So they come into the city of Jericho, and the king hears that there are men from Israel who are here in our town. And they'd like to find them. They'd like to get rid of them. She hides them. And what else did she do?
They were there, but they had already left.
Right. She goes on to, when the men come to her house, she tells a few lies, right? She says, verse 4, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But what had she done? She had hid them on the roof, put them under some stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. And she had talked to them before they had laid down on the roof. And so the story is kind of told out of order, because then verse 8 and beyond, we get their conversation before she's interrogated by the men at her door. What was it that had given her her faith? Where does faith come from? She knew they were meant from God. Clarissa?
Heard of all the things leading up and all the people, and she believed that it was of God, and she feared the Lord, and the fear was on the people. So that was leading her to aid them, and then to also seek aid for her and her family as well.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I think this is long before the internet and everybody having a phone in their pocket. But what had the people in Jericho heard? Francis?
A God that saved his people from Egypt. They heard about the plagues, they heard about the departing through the Red Sea, and they knew that their God was with them, and if anybody was against them, they would be against their God.
What about those 2 nations on the other side of the Jordan? Yeah, they'd heard about that too. King Sihon, King Og of Bashan, and Moab. Those nations had been destroyed, utterly destroyed by Israel. And so those things, just like we notice in the New Testament, common memory verse, Romans 10:17, now faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Faith comes from hearing. When you hear something, you either believe it or you don't. And that's where her faith comes from. She hears of these things that have occurred, and it gave her a remarkable faith. What impact had it had on everybody else? They were afraid, right? But they weren't willing to take this life-altering action, right? She's laying it all on the line here, taking a huge risk by siding with the people of God. And so she is commended twice in our New Testaments, if not more. But the 2 that I wanted you to look at, Hebrews 11, is the Hall of Fame of faith. And she's mentioned there for her faith. And then she's mentioned again in the book of James as one who was justified by her works in what she did. And so that's pretty remarkable. What are the specific things that the commentary from the New Testament says that she did by faith?
She hid the spies and she sent them out the other way.
That's right. Hebrews 11, verse 31. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. That was a faithful action, welcoming the spies in peace. James 2, verse 25. In the same way, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? That was a faithful action, to receive them and send them out another way. Interesting that there we see the idea of justified by works, right? Because faith without works is dead. And she's one of the examples. If she had just had faith, I believe in the Lord, but hadn't welcomed the spies in peace, would she have been physically saved? No. She makes this deal with the spies. What was the deal? Yeah, she wants to be saved when they come and destroy Jericho. She knows God's going to destroy it. God's got power from all she's heard. And so she says, spare me. And so what did they say? They say, you will be saved, but only on one condition, right? What was the condition? Maybe it's two conditions. Silence. What else? The scarlet cord. It's a lesson we've been learning since we were in the smallest of the classes. You put that scarlet thread out the window, and when we see that those who are in that house will be saved. So if you gather your family into that house, stay in the house, you'll be saved. And we'll see that plays out just like that in our study next week. And so there's conditions. You see, it's consistent through our Bibles. God has grace to save, but sometimes there are conditions, actions that man has to take in order to receive that salvation. Are we saved by faith? Yes. Do we have to obey in the waters of baptism? Yes. That's when our sins are washed away. So we see the same with Rahab. Any comments there, Norm?
Remarkable similarity between that and the red blood over the doors, and you had to have your family inside of that door. Otherwise, the destructor would kill you. So amazing the similarities.
Interesting connection.
The red color as well, yeah. So let's get specific on this question about the lying. Some will argue that lying is acceptable to God sometimes because Rahab lied. Is this an honest representation of God's law? Jesse?
For me, this is a conflicting question.
Okay.
Because just being a spy is a pretense, and it's deceptive. I'm here as your friend and a visitor, but in a couple of days, you're all going to be dead. So there's an inherent dishonesty there. So you could kind of, for one thing, in a time of war. Mm-hmm. Second to that, Rahab has heard about the great wonders of God. I'm not so sure she's familiar with the law or amenable to the law that was given to the Israelites. And that law said you don't bear false witness against your neighbor. That is to bring a charge or an accusation. Now, I'm not trying to defend lying. I don't know if that aims straight at the issue necessarily. There is dishonesty of sorts, yes. But again, just going in as a spy is kind of dishonest in a way also.
I suppose. Yeah, but
it's not bearing false witness against your neighbor. That would be wrong, right? Will?
But that's what I'm saying. She didn't do that.
Right.
If you consider who she lied to, if she's allied herself with the spies, they would be quote unquote her neighbor if you understand what I'm saying, mm-hmm. and not so with the people in the city. That's why I say for me it's a conflicting question.
Okay.
And I asked it because I knew it would raise some conflict that we do have to deal with, right? Will?
She's not commended for her lying in James, just for protecting them.
Yeah, interesting.
What had the spies asked her to do? Did they ask her to lie for them? No, those were her choices, right, Gil?
Silence, right?
They asked very specifically, do not tell this business of ours. Chapter 2, verse 14. I've got some military men here. What do they train you to do if you're captured and they're interrogating you? What do you give?
False representations if you can.
Okay.
Name, rank, and serial
That's what I was going for. Name, rank, and serial number, right? Just give them the minimum.
You don't have to tell what you know, right? And so that's all they asked her to do. Don't tell what you know. And so, first, laying the plain principle of what God's expectation is for man, what do we find in the Old Testament and in the New Testament about lying? Right. What was the devil called? Father of lies. You're like your father. He was a liar from the beginning, right? Any other passages that you wrote down that speak against lying? Sam?
It's one of the things that God hates.
Yeah, Proverbs chapter 6.
Yep. It was one of the 10 Commandments. Like Jesse pointed out, she doesn't know the 10 Commandments yet. She also doesn't know that, or maybe she knows, but she's a harlot, right? And that's probably not looked upon favorably, even in the Gentile world. But that's a sin. God's not approving of it just because he uses a harlot here to save his people. New Testament, any New Testament places? Norm?
Sam,
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm going to derail you. I guess I have a question. So, if she wasn't supposed to give their business to whoever went and sent for her, like, would she have just, would they have killed her if she didn't say what she did? Like, I know God can protect her, and obviously something could have happened.
Yeah.
But it seems like in her situation, what she would know is if I tell the truth, then the God of the Israel is going to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't tell the truth,
Right.
then
Yeah, and
That's the question that people ask. Sometimes this is likened to those who hid the Jews, right, during the Holocaust, right? And that's a noble act. But the choice to lie is always your own choice. And the willingness to die for what is right is praised by God. And so a person who is unwilling to give up information and then dies as a result, that's a noble act. It's praised by God. Norm?
And in your reference with the Holocaust is a good example. And a lot of people that were involved in hiding those people, sometimes they would say, I don't want to know your name, and I don't want to know too much. So I don't have to lie. Because liars, we're actually, as human beings, pretty good at detecting liars and finding the truth and ferreting it out. And good or bad, the British were good at it, Americans were good at it, the Nazis were good at finding liars and then getting rid of them, ferreting out who they worked with. And so to protect themselves, they would oftentimes be like, hey, I don't know. And that was a legitimate and true answer that they could give because they didn't want to know, that they had to adjust all of the things. So lying has never been a good thing. Whether I'm lying for good reasons, it's never really a good thing to be on that side of dishonesty.
Yeah, we've got to remember, Ephesians 4:25 is one place, therefore laying aside falsehood. Speak truth, each one of you with his neighbor, for we're members of one another. Many places, right, that are plain. And we need to cling to those things that are plainly revealed, right? Those things belong to us and to our children. He's revealed that God hates lying. And so that's the truth. Any reasoning beyond that gets us into trouble, right? When it doesn't say that Rahab was praised for her lies. Rahab? Or Randy?
She had faith, she had heard about Israel, but she didn't know, again, all of God's laws.
Right.
But it's because of the grace and mercy of God that we continue to live and have opportunity to make changes in our lives. And that's what she did. That's the reason she's mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. You remember Peter lied, but it was because of God's grace and mercy that he continued to live and preach the gospel. He repented. He made changes in his life. God never approves of sin, never approves of lying, no matter what.
No matter what.
Even the people that the heathen nations, he condemned them, but yet there were people that come out of those nations that were not God's chosen people, but they joined him in faith and obeyed him.
Sure.
Revelation chapter 21 verse 8, all liars are going to be condemned and receive eternal punishment.
All liars, cowards, there's a long list there who are not going to be with God, but will be in the lake of fire. So we shouldn't try to reason our way into,
Situational ethics. I've got situations where I can disobey God and he'll be okay with it. No, we need to obey God and let the chips fall where they may. Is God able to save us in ways that we can't possibly understand? I think that's the point of the story, right? Rahab's going to be saved in a way that, the walls are going to fall down and her house is on the wall. yet she's still saved. When the spies come back, question 5, when the spies come back, what kind of a report do they have to give to Joshua? What was that? The people fear them. Last verse of chapter 2, surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us. And so, as Joshua may be thinking, how is God going to give us this victory? What was their perception of the people in the land? From all the reports that they'd heard.
Strong. They've got walled cities.
They've got walls. They've got
Giants. They're strong, formidable people, someone to fear. But then you get this report and find out they've melted away. They've got no courage. They've got no strength because of what they've heard. Lena?
But Joshua was one of the 12 that went originally and said, we can do it.
Yes.
From the very beginning, even when others were reporting there are giants here, Joshua and Caleb said, but no, we can do it because God is with us. And here this report from spies just supports his confidence in that.
I agree.
And I asked that question wrong because it's them who say this to Joshua. It wasn't him that realized it. He probably already knew this is what they were going to find. Yeah, great point. All right, we've got like we've got no minutes. An incredible miracle as Israel crosses the Jordan, where the waters are cut off. Rahab had heard about the Red Sea, but now the parting of the Red Sea essentially happens again, where the river Jordan is stopped and the people are able to cross into the land of Canaan on dry land. Incredible miracle, and it'll be up to Jason on if he wants to spend any time on that next week. Thanks, everyone.